Hello, my name's Rachael Cox. Welcome to 100 Stories Deep. Today I'm reading a segment of my first novel called Dreamscape, which is due to be published later this year. I've chosen this story because it's science fiction and a representation of the kind of stories that I enjoy to read. I've been writing it for many years, so I'm really excited to share a section of it with you today. Dreamscape is the story of a 14-year-old girl, Carly, who's grown up in care. She has strange vision and dreams that take her on a journey to find her true identity and her twin. It's also the story of an alien rock whose influence has massive impact on the sequence of events. The section I'm going to read is later in the story, when Carly meets her grandmother Helena and learns more about her family and the alien rock. Dreamscape. Carly was up early, washed, dressed and down for breakfast by 7:30. The others started to roll in from about 8 onwards, and Helena joined them around 8:30. She entered the room with a spring in her step and a freshness in her face. "Good morning, all. I hope you slept well in my humble home." Even at this time in the morning, she looked elegant. She smiled as they greeted her and stood up to welcome her to the table. "Oh, don't worry about me. I've eaten a couple of hours ago. I'm an early riser, always have been." Carly felt a little strange as she looked at Helena this morning, but she didn't know why. Helena seemed to pick up on it straight away. "Did you have a troubled night, my dear?" "Oh no, I slept like a baby. I just had a few dreams, but that's nothing new, is it?" She laughed and glanced over at Jane, Martha and Will, who were sitting together around the other side of the oval-shaped table. They smiled back in agreement and continued to tuck into their organic breakfast. When they all finished eating, Jane looked at Billy, Will and Martha and said, "Okay guys, are you ready to do some exploring?" Yeah," Will mumbled, finishing his last mouthful. "Carly, are you coming?" "I'll catch up with you guys later. I was hoping to catch another little chat with Helena and Alicia." At this, Helena smiled and nodded. She turned to the others as they were getting up to leave. "I hope you all enjoy being here at the sanctuary. There are lots of things to explore, and if you need any help, Siddy's in the garden somewhere. I'm sure he'd enjoy showing you around. He takes a lot of pride in the gardens and the animals we have here." Jane smiled at her warmly. "Thanks, we'll go and look for him. I can't wait." Once they'd gone, and there was just Carly, Alicia and Helena left, Helena cleared her throat and began. "There is a story I feel I must tell you. It's a long time since I last told it, but somehow I doubt it will ever be received with such meaning as now." She took a deep breath and looked across the table at Carly and Alicia. She poured herself a mint tea, took a sip and began to speak. "About 100 or so years ago, in a solar system light years from here, a planet exploded, sending fragments hurtling through space. In itself, that's not unusual, probably happens all the time. But this planet was unique. It was alive, but not as we understand life. Many of these fragments disintegrated while travelling through space over decades, but some found themselves descending on our solar system around 50 years ago." She took a sip of her tea and continued. "When me and Octavia were little girls, we were out playing one day on the scrubland. We were 8 years old," she smiled in reminiscence, "and we found a piece. It was pretty dried up. Anyway, we broke it in half and each made a pendant out of it. Here, I'm still wearing mine." She reached inside her blouse and produced a strange-looking pendant. Carly couldn't believe it. She'd seen that pendant before. Ever since she knew about being a twin, she had assumed that the twins in the dream were her and Ife, when in fact it would seem they were Helena and Octavia 50 years ago. "My sister Octavia and I were always telepathic, and we used to co-dream, share the same dream. Well, we found that these gifts were enhanced by the pendant, and we dreamt the history of the stone together." "So that's your memory?" "I've dreamt about it since I was about 5. There were always 2 little girls who looked like me playing in the grass, laughing, falling over and then finding the stone. Then later wearing the pendants. I've dreamt it all. When I realised I was a twin, I naturally assumed it was me and my twin I was looking at." Helena nodded. "Femi, you've dreamt about me and Octavia finding the stone?" "Yes, again last night. So that explains the clothes. You both wore red dresses and white running shoes. My mother made those dresses. And you held up the stones together and there was a flash of light." "What?" Helena was confused. "I was with you up until the flash of light. We used to hold them up together and pretend we were superheroes when we were playing. But I don't remember a flash of light. That bit must be yours," she laughed. Carly was in shock. No wonder she never saw these dreams through her own eyes. They weren't her eyes. But if she'd never met Helena before, how did she pick up on her memories? After a pause, and with a look of slight amazement in her face, Helena continued. Anyway, this meteor shower had also sent fragments of rock to the moon's surface, which, unlike Earth, has no atmosphere to fry up the rock like the one we found. So there was a possibility that on the moon, the rock would maintain its properties. So he knew about it all along, Alicia sighed. Carmen was right, it was what he was looking for. Oh, it's taken me a lifetime to reach some of these conclusions. My visions, like Femi's dreams, come sporadically, and their meaning isn't always obvious at first. I told my husband about my dreams and visions, and although he never doubted me, he was a man of science, and men of science always need proof. He started to explore the rock I'd given him, and realised he had something pretty unique. He believed enough to finance the mining programme, but sadly not enough to leave it alone. He got some crazy idea about colonising the moon, but I tried to tell him that he must leave it alone once we knew for sure it was there and evolving naturally. I told him the rock was alive and had a soul, and it would protect itself if it felt threatened. Alicia nodded, but he didn't listen. She paused and sighed. You have to understand about my husband. He was a good man with an honest soul, but he was easily influenced, easily manipulated, and in honesty greedy. I sat by and watched while his greed, and the greed of other powerful men and women around him, turned him into someone I didn't like very much. I was a humble, quiet woman in those days, and I did not impose my views. When my sister died, I lost a part of myself, a part of my confidence. She lowered her head. But that all changed, you see, the night my husband came home with the news of your conception. He came home after a few months away on the lunar station. He came in all serious and said, Lena, I have something to tell you. She mimicked his voice as she spoke his words. He said, our son has taken upon himself to impregnate one of the workers on the lunar programme, a young geologist, a promising one at that, called Carmen Allende. She's totally unsuitable, and anyway, I've already arranged for him to marry Mylene Wellington. As you know, she's very well connected. It won't do us any harm at all for him to marry her. So I asked him, what does Junior want? Does he love her, this Carmen? Do you know what he said? He thought he did, but now he sees sense. I and some of the board had a word with him. You mean you convinced him to see your point of view, I said. You know you can't always control other people's lives. You should let him make his own decisions. Lena, he told me, you have to understand how important this is. They've always looked down on us. They accept us to a point, but not really in another way. Our children are not of pure breeding, and you know how important that is to these people. If Junior is to be accepted in society and by the board, he must marry right. If he got with this lunar worker, it would all be over for him and our family. I am not prepared to let that happen. I told him, Zachary, these children will be born, and what will be will be. He looked at me in shock and said, children? I said, yes, children. She's having twins, and you better believe me when I tell you, you can't control everyone's life. Leave the woman be. Don't trouble her. Trust me, Zachary, I will not let you harm them. Harm them, he said. Why would I want to harm them? Femi, I had a link to you and Ife from that day. I was aware of you. I've always been aware of you. I just didn't know where you were. When Zachary told me what happened, I was happy that Alicia had got you away. But when he told me that Ife died 30 minutes after being born, I knew that was not true. Femi, I still feel her connection. It's weak, but it's there, somewhere. I know she's alive, just like I knew you were coming. Carly looked at her grandmother and smiled. I felt her too over the years, I'm sure of it. Femi, my dear, Alicia, I'm so sorry to cut this short for now, but I have a few things I must tend to. Femi, would you meet me in the garden later, where you had drinks last night? I want to show you something. Helena was already in the garden when Carly arrived. She smiled and stood up to greet her. You know I love to sit here in my little garden underneath the jasmine bush, especially when it's in bloom like now. Look at all the pretty flowers. Carly looked at the array of small white bell-shaped flowers that adorned the bush. They were very beautiful indeed. Come, my dear, there's something I want to show you. Helena led Carly along a path at the side of the house. She hadn't ventured this way yet. There was an old-fashioned white brick wall, about 5 foot high, with trees and bushes peeking over the top. There was an old gate which led into a walled garden of the kind Carly had never seen before. She looked around her in amazement, with Helena watching on, enjoying her delight. Wow, this is beautiful. I've never seen a garden like this before. It is beautiful, isn't it? There were trellises with creeping plants displaying the most intricate and unusual flowers. There were clusters of flowers and flowering bushes all around the perimeter of the garden. It was an array of colour and sweet scents. She could hear buzzing. What's that? Oh, the buzzing. It's the bees. Look, there's one. Carly stared at a big furry golden and black bee the size of a marble. Then out of the corner of her eye she saw the most amazing thing of all, butterflies. All different colours, patterns and sizes. Butterflies, wow! I thought they were extinct except for a few clones at the zoo. They are. This is my pride and joy. Did you know that the appearance of butterflies shows that the land is fertile? You will only find butterflies around certain flowers, and I've grown them all here. And yes, before you ask, the butterflies were initially cloned from frozen larvae, but they're now breeding naturally and their numbers have grown extensively. I started with 20 butterflies. Now look around you. Femi, there are hundreds of them. They travel to other parts of the sanctuary too, but this is where you find them the most. Funny thing is, your father's wife Mylene gave me the butterfly larvae as a present when she saw my garden. That was before she knew I didn't like her. At this, Helena smiled cheekily at Carly and laughed a little under her breath. What I don't understand is how come everything grows here so well? I mean, I've never seen nature like it, not even on the journey here. Sure, there was more than in the city, but nothing like here. So what's your secret? Helena laughed and looked very pleased with herself. Well, I do have a little secret. I planted a small piece of the live rock plant in the ground. That's what really gave birth to the sanctuary. Before that, some vegetation still grew from the gardens my mother planted here, but nothing was edible. I always visited this house even before I moved back here to live. It was a kind of holiday home, a sanctuary of a different kind. But after I planted the rock, within a year the soil had changed. We tested it, and the level of contamination had diminished considerably. Within 2 years it was clear, and more plant varieties started to grow. At first there were a few varieties of fruit and veg, but now we have many, all edible. Plus we have 18 species of animal, many that were near extinction, only found in zoos. We got some cows and sheep. They used to be everywhere when I was a little girl, and maybe they will be again. I don't know what the rock plant is doing scientifically, but I know this much. It's a chance to return this planet to the fertile place it used to be, before we messed it up with our ignorance and greed. This rock plant offers us a future, and offers this planet a future, and I'm guessing that the moon may also start a new chapter, but we must leave it alone to do what it needs to do naturally. Femi, I haven't told anyone this before. The only person who knows beside me, and now you, is my daughter Maya. So for now, let it be our little secret, okay? Sure, of course. Carly had very mixed feelings about this. She felt honoured that her grandmother trusted her enough to share this information. But she felt strange because she told Marta and Will everything, and now Alicia too. This was something she must keep to herself, a secret. But she also felt strangely compelled not to question this request, and she felt that Helena knew this only too well. She led Carly to a bench on the sunny side of the garden, where there were clusters of red roses and buddleias, apparently favourites of butterflies. Things are better now than they were environmentally, and there is awareness now, but what bothers me is the complacency. People believe what they're told. They don't question or protest anymore. I think the last great protest was Alicia and her friends on the mining programme, but since she was publicly discredited, I guess people have just started to toe the line. When I was a little girl, I remember going out one day and everyone was walking. No one was driving any kind of vehicle at all. No cars, no buses, no trams, trains, planes, helicopters, nothing. So I asked my mother why, and she told me it was a protest. The people were protesting that the fuel companies were putting up prices and damaging the environment, not listening to anyone about the reforms that needed to be made. So to show their anger, they refused to buy or use any fuel for a day. It hurt the fuel companies bad. Even in just one day they lost millions. And they knew that people had the power to do it again. Another day it was food. No one would buy anything with certain additives in or from a certain company. The internet was circulating the information and helping people get organised. It was starting to work. She laughed to herself. The corporates were in a real mess, so they started selling up or merging with other more stable companies. They reached a point where there were only a few multinationals left, and they spent a lot of time, money and effort competing against one another, trying to strike deals against one another and get politicians to put laws in place to affect others' trading. They were taking so much flack from people across the globe about their harmful products, the effects on the environment and people's lives. They decided to do one final merger and become one world corporation. It has its branches east and west, but it's the same type of people and setup. They did away with government, as everyone knew it was just a cover for the corporations anyway, and that was how they got absolute power. Your great-grandfather, Winston Carmichael, was on that very first board. They own everything. The people work for them, pick up their wages, and then give it all back to them in rent, shopping and living costs. They did resolve many of our environmental problems, those that were in their control anyway. It was too late for some things, but at least we're still here, and our existence is much healthier and less damaging to the environment than it was in my mother's day. But they've put a lot of effort into pacifying the masses. Information control, media control, education control, even entertainment control, but it didn't work on everyone, and they were labelled antisocial or challenging. Eventually they had to admit it was gifted. Over the next couple of days, Carly made the most of her time with Helena. She enjoyed hearing stories about the past and her family. It was all helping to piece things together. I told my husband about the existence of the rock, and through his own research he discovered its unusual properties. What he didn't know about were its regenerative properties. That is, not until Carmen discovered them. She was the first person to replant the rock, if you like, and it rooted, like a plant. She tried to hide her findings from the corporation, but they have their ways. They managed to uncover most of it, but they weren't quite sure where the research was leading them. For the last 12 years, they've been trying to discover more about its significance. You see, the rock plant has regenerative powers and is undergoing a vastly accelerated evolution. There's a good chance it could terraform the moon over the next 50 years, so they think, but into what they're not quite sure. They're still trying to research that, hence the ongoing operations on Lunar Station. My husband told me when combined with other substances, it reacts very strangely, like a sentient life form. It reacts, recoils, even squeals. When separated from its root source, it hardens as any rock, though it maintains its luminescent glow. Other than that, it appears dead. In fact, it's dormant, and when placed back in contact with the right surface, it comes back to life. Now, what always bothered me was the sickness that the mine workers got. I tried to tell him, this is a sentient life form, and you must treat it with respect. If it feels under attack, it may try to defend itself, as any sentient life form would, as we would. He thought I was being melodramatic, but I could see that underneath the surface I'd made him think. He could never fully dismiss what I said to him, because he knew I spoke sense. As more people got sick and died, I tried to convince him to take me seriously. Eventually he did, but it was too late for Carmen. Everyone who got sick said that the first symptoms of the sickness were piercing headaches and weakness, followed by a kind of delirium, waking dreams, that sort of thing, like when you have a bad fever. I spoke to Carmen when she was sick. She said the same thing. I managed to get her to tell me some of her waking dreams, and they involved explosions, something being blown to pieces. It scared her because she thought it could be the Earth or the Moon. So I asked her, was it a planet then? And she said, oh yes, and it was blown to pieces in a big explosion. It was at this point that I realised what was happening. The rock, or its soul, was trying desperately to communicate with the only other sentient life forms it had come into contact with, but they weren't able to communicate or understand the messages being sent. It was too much for their brains. In its frustration, the soul of the rock was releasing something poisonous to us. Now, whether this was on purpose or by accident, the consequences were the same. A year after they closed down the mine, I persuaded my husband to let me visit the moon's surface with a team of scientists who were going to check on the progress. As soon as I reached the surface and found the rock, I heard it. It talked to me. It showed me its history, and I let it know that I understood, and that I'd known of it for many years since it landed here. But even my psychic abilities were not strong enough to maintain communication for long, and even I got a headache. But there were other things which made Carmen's illness quite different from the others. All of the others deteriorated slowly. Their symptoms came on gradually. But Carmen, she felt sick one day and was dead 3 months later. She was in the latter stages of pregnancy and was the last one to die. Femi, I believe that the spirit or soul of that life force became aware of you and Ife and thought it could communicate to Carmen through you. Your telepathic levels would already have been active by then, and if Ife is the psychic we believe her to be, maybe the rock plant was aware of this. I have believed since that day that you and Ife will be the ones to communicate with the spirit of the rock plant. Then maybe we will know what will become of the moon in 50 years or so. This isn't just a rock, Femi. It's life, nature, energy. Call it what you will. It has a soul. Carly pondered on this for a while. When you say it could terraform the moon, what do you mean? Change it? Well, yes, very possibly. The moon has no atmosphere and therefore no life as we know it has ever been able to live there. But this rock plant is life and it lives there. If it changes the properties of the moon, there's a possibility that some kind of atmosphere could develop and other life could evolve from the environment it creates. That in turn could affect Earth. What about the piece you planted here? Would that change the properties of the Earth? It's already changing, like I told you, but much more slowly. There is already an established ecosystem on this planet, so the rock plant is not starting with a blank canvas. I believe it will enhance Earth and repair some of the damage that's been done over centuries. It could fix things that we're not able to repair ourselves like it did here with the contamination levels. I do not believe it poses any harm or danger. I think it understands what needs doing. I hope that doesn't sound crazy. Helena's words, as always, made so much sense, and Carly couldn't help believing she was right. One of the main themes of Dreamscape is dreams and their significance. And this is something that you find in many ancient cultures around the world, the significance of dreaming. So if you want to find out more about these, try Googling dreams in ancient cultures and see what examples you can find. Also, if you have interest in dreams yourself, try keeping a dream journal, if you remember them. Thank you for listening. You can watch and listen to more stories in the 100 Stories Deep series if you subscribe using the link below. Thanks and goodbye.